Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. Hey everyone, my name's Ashley, and I'm here to share something that completely changed my life. It's hard to talk about this, but I feel like I need to. Maybe I can help other women avoid what I went through. So please stay with me till the end because this is serious. It all started on a cold November evening in Boston, about 3 years ago. I was working as a private tutor back then, helping college students with their dissertations. Times were tough, and I was struggling to make ends meet with just my day job at the library. I received a message through my tutoring website, a new client who was very direct. He said he'd heard great things about me from one of his colleagues and wanted to hire me for a private session. The offer was generous, very generous. Cash up front, no complications. He seemed polite, respectful, and best of all, had no unusual requests. Just a straightforward tutoring session at a coffee shop to discuss his research project. I was suspicious at first. It's not every day someone so perfect comes along, but you know how it is. Sometimes you think you're in control, that you know what you're doing. He sent me the location, a coffee shop in a business district I wasn't familiar with, but nothing that seemed suspicious. I decided to accept. Before going, I texted the address to my roommate and promised to check in afterward. I thought I was being safe. Big mistake. On the way there, things started to feel off. He called and asked me to turn off my location sharing and follow some specific directions instead of my GPS. This immediately raised red flags, but he spoke with such charming confidence that I ended up ignoring my instincts. Gradually, the scenery changed. What was supposed to be a bustling business district turned into something else entirely. We left the city proper and entered what looked like an abandoned tech campus from the dot-com bust. The building stood empty with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. My stomach dropped, but I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. It was when he pulled into a completely empty parking lot that I realized the magnitude of the problem. There was no coffee shop, no lights, nothing but us and the silence. My heart raced. I was alone with someone I barely knew in the middle of nowhere, as dusk was settling in. That's when everything fell apart. His demeanor changed instantly. The polite manner vanished, replaced by a cold smile that sent chills down my spine. He said with a voice that still gives me nightmares, "You know, I've been waiting for this moment for a very long time." My hands began to sweat, and I felt my body freeze for a few seconds. He got out of the car and opened my door, but not to be gentlemanly. He grabbed my arm tightly, and in that moment, I realized I had to do something, or I wouldn't leave this place alive. I tried to stay calm and talk by times somehow. I asked what he wanted, tried to make him think I was cooperating. Meanwhile, I analyzed every detail around me. I noticed the passenger door wasn't fully latched. If I could break free, maybe I'd have a chance. Then he made a mistake. He loosened his grip on my arm for a second to reach for something in his pocket. I didn't think twice. I shoved the door as hard as I could and ran like my life depended on it. because honestly, it did. He yelled behind me, and I could hear his heavy footsteps in my direction. The place was a maze of debris and rusted server racks. I stumbled, cut myself on scattered metal pieces, but I didn't stop. Finally, I saw an opening in one of the fences. I squeezed my body through and continued running, now along a deserted access road that led away from that nightmare. My breathing was ragged, my heart felt like it would explode, but somehow I was free, at least for the moment. I was barefoot. I'd lost my shoes while running injured, and lost on a dark road with no idea which direction led to civilization. I didn't know if he was still behind me, but I couldn't stop to find out. So I kept moving, trying to stay focused. After what seemed like an eternity, I saw headlights in the distance. A car was approaching. I waved frantically, but the driver nearly didn't stop. They probably thought I was a threat or something. I managed to scream, "Please help me. Someone's trying to hurt me." This made them hesitate. The driver, an older woman in nursing scrubs, lowered her window and asked what was happening. I explained everything in a few desperate words, and I think the terror in my voice convinced her. She opened the door and told me to get in. The feeling of relief was overwhelming, but I knew this wasn't over yet. I asked her to take me directly to the nearest police station. When we arrived, I told the officers everything. They listened attentively, but the fear hadn't left me. I knew he was still out there somewhere. In the weeks that followed, they actually managed to track him down using security camera footage from a gas station near the abandoned campus. Turns out I wasn't his first target. There had been 2 other women who'd gone missing after meeting with someone matching his description. They never found those women. After that night, my life changed completely. I spent months recovering from the trauma, thinking about how everything could have ended much worse. I changed my name, moved to another state, and completely reinvented myself. I decided to share my story here to warn other women. If you work in a similar field or know someone who does, please be careful. Never go to isolated places without letting someone know exactly where you'll be and having a safety plan in place. If this story touched you in any way, please subscribe to this channel, and share this. It could save lives. We never know who might need to hear this. And above all, take care of yourselves, because at the end of the day, nobody can do that for you. Trust your instincts. They're usually right. Mine were screaming at me that day, and I ignored them. I was lucky to get a second chance. Not everyone does. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Good evening. My name is Morgan, and from a very young age, I noticed my parents, Alina and David, treated me very differently from how they treated my sister Faye. Although I was born just 2 years before her, I grew up accustomed to receiving compliments and affection that seemed routine to me. Meanwhile, Faye was almost always left aside, like a shadow no one bothered to acknowledge. I didn't understand the reason for this disparity, but during childhood, it didn't bother me much. I believed that way of living was natural, and only understood the magnitude of the injustice many years later. My first hints that something was wrong came during birthday parties. At my celebrations, the house would be filled with balloons, snacks, and sweets. Relatives and friends brought presents, and my parents beamed with pride. For Faye, when her turn came, there was little fanfare, just a simple cake without decorations, and hardly any guests beyond a few aunts and uncles. I found it strange, but never really questioned it. Perhaps I was too comfortable in my position as the cherished eldest daughter. Things only got worse with time. In school, I participated in theater productions, science fairs, and sporting events, with my mother always sitting in the audience wearing an enormous smile. As for Faye, when she bothered to show up, she lingered in the corners, detached from everything. Gradually, I noticed she stopped trying to receive approval from anyone. She spent long intervals alone, staring out the window or scribbling in her notebook. Whenever I tried to strike up a conversation, even out of curiosity, she would scowl and walk away. She didn't seem to trust me at all. "Leave your sister alone," my mother would say, shaking her head when I commented on Faye's peculiarities. "Some people are born more complicated. You're doing very well, Morgan. Don't worry about it too much." My father, David, would usually agree as if the subject wasn't worth pursuing. He would pat me on the back and invite me to watch TV or walk in the backyard with an ease that irritated me. Sometimes I caught him looking at Faye from a distance, as if trying to decipher something, but he never spoke openly about it. I wanted to understand what was going on in Faye's head, but I felt powerless to break through the barrier she had erected against the world. This distance widened during adolescence. I loved participating in student competitions, lectures, and essay contests. My parents encouraged me and even paid for extra art and music classes. Meanwhile, Faye would disappear before school ended or show up with marker drawings on her arms, as if she were sketching symbols no one understood. At home, she locked herself in her room and spent hours on strange websites or reading books that appeared to be about magic, witchcraft, and things like that. Before I knew it, she was dressing in long black clothes, adorned with inverted crosses or necklaces, with pendants I didn't recognize. One day, I invaded her room looking for a phone charger, and nearly fell over when I opened her dresser drawer. There were various pamphlets, notebooks, and books about witchcraft, sacrifices, and rituals. The drawings sent a chill down my spine. Faye entered the room at that very moment and started yelling at me. "Who gave you permission to snoop through my things?" I justified myself, saying I was just looking for a cable. She screamed for me to get out. I hesitated a bit and realized this went beyond simple rebellion. There were heavy elements there, things that made me uncomfortable just to look at them. But my parents didn't seem to care. When I told them, Mom just shrugged. Faye has always been contrary. Soon she'll find another whim. That disturbed me. I wanted to help my sister somehow. At school, however, she didn't make it easy either. When I saw her in the hallways, she was in the company of people nobody knew well, kids who constantly repeated grades and smoked in secret. It was common for the principal to call my parents to complain that Faye had missed several classes or gotten into trouble, but they never showed any willingness to help her. I tried to point out that it was wrong to ignore all this, but I only received evasive answers. My father would say, "Enough headaches. If she doesn't want to study, Let her deal with the consequences. He said this, but I noticed tension in his gaze, something that seemed to torment him. I never asked directly what it was, but it was clear he didn't know how to deal with Faye's behavior either. Over time, it reached a point where Faye didn't even try to talk to the family anymore. There was a wall of silence between her and my parents. When I won some school award, they would celebrate me with photos and internet posts. Faye would sometimes appear in the living room, look at all that celebration, and leave without saying anything. I could see a deep hurt in her eyes, but I couldn't rescue her from that dark place where she had locked herself. That's how it went until we turned 16 and 14, respectively. At my insistence, my parents decided to take a vacation. I thought it might be a chance for reconciliation. Despite everything, we went to a coastal area and stayed in a simple but pleasant hotel. They bought me new swimsuits and gave me money to enjoy myself at the kiosks, while Faye got a hand-me-down swimsuit that had been mine and almost no spending money. When I asked her if she wanted to walk on the sand, I received only a look of contempt. "I'd rather stay here," she muttered, sitting in front of the window of our room. I tried to argue that the beach was beautiful, but she got up and left, abruptly ending the conversation. That hurt me. The trip I had hoped would serve as a truce only reinforced the gulf between us. When we returned, she became even more withdrawn. She spent the night awake, from what I could hear through the wall separating our rooms. The idea that she might be involved with something sinister began to haunt me. The fights at home became frequent. My mother and father said they couldn't stand the problems Faye caused at school anymore. Once she came home with an injured arm, as if she had been beaten or gotten into a fight. No one asked what had really happened. There were only recriminations. I finally exploded. "Don't you think she needs help? Therapy or something?" My father sighed, annoyed. "We're not going to throw money away on someone who doesn't want to be helped, Morgan. You're doing so well in your studies. Let your sister face the consequences of her actions." He ended the subject in 2 minutes. My mother showed no other attitude, just remained silent. Later she commented, "Sometimes Faye reminds me of things I'd rather forget, but it's too late to change anything." At that moment, I felt a chill. There was something deeper that explained the distance. This wasn't just a difference in temperament between sisters. I started piecing together memories, scattered comments, and concluded there had to be a big secret there. Something no one wanted to tell me. Faye turned 15 without any celebration, without a present, without anyone really saying happy birthday. On her birthday, I bought a small cake with my own money and left it in her room. She looked at me and for a second seemed moved, but then turned her face to the wall. "I don't need your pity," she said harshly. When she got up, I saw in the corner of the bed some notebooks full of strange symbols. She was drawing marks that reminded me of circles, crossed triangles, bizarre figures I didn't understand. I was seized by a shiver. I felt my sister was diving into a mysterious and dangerous world, but with no support from anyone. What could I do alone? The worst came a few weeks later. Faye announced she was dropping out of school and leaving home to live with friends who shared practices of witchcraft and energies. No one tried to stop her. My father just rolled his eyes. "If she wants to get lost, let her get lost." fewer problems for us. As for my mother, she limited herself to laconic comments, making it clear she wouldn't make any effort to dissuade her. I was horrified. You're going to just let her leave without talking to her, without at least trying to understand what's going on. My mother shrugged, and my father went to the backyard to smoke. The day Faye packed her bags, an old backpack and a torn tote, I tried to say goodbye more affectionately. It seemed like the last chance to tell her I really cared about her. She, however, passed by me without even looking at me. She left the house and disappeared. My parents showed no remorse whatsoever. I locked myself in my room and cried. There was something very wrong with this cold attitude. I was certain there was a hidden past that explained so much indifference. I began to investigate. I asked my maternal grandparents, who lived on a small farm. The first time I brought up the subject, they exchanged worried glances and said they didn't want to speak ill of anyone. I felt they knew something, but preferred to keep quiet. With my paternal grandparents, Warren and Louise, it wasn't much different. I visited them one weekend, asking why my parents despised Faye to the point of letting her leave without protest. My grandfather Warren gave me a severe look and murmured, "Faye was always different." As for my grandmother Louise, she pretended not to hear, quickly changing the subject. I left there even more determined to find answers. I also talked to my aunts, uncles, and cousins, but they all avoided touching on the core of the issue. It was only with an older cousin that I got a relevant clue. She told me that in one of the conversations among the adults, she heard mentions of a terrible man who had marked my mother's life, and that somehow this was linked to Faye's pregnancy. I was perplexed. What if Faye was the product of violence my mother had suffered in the past? That wouldn't leave my head. With redoubled courage, I confronted my mother in the kitchen when we were alone. "Mom, I know Faye isn't Dad's daughter. I've heard people commenting on strange things. You need to explain to me what really happened. It's not normal for a family to have such indifference." My mother trembled as she dried the dishes. She denied everything, saying I was making up nonsense. But at the same time, her hands were shaking, and her gaze was distant as if trying to hold back tears. Shortly after, she asked me to go up to my room, ending the conversation. That only increased my anxiety. I felt I was close to unearthing a serious secret that would explain Faye's pain. Somehow, I also felt guilty for having received so much attention while my sister was excluded. I wondered if I could have done something to bring her closer to me. One night, I decided I wouldn't rest until I found Faye to speak to her personally. I got in touch with a classmate of hers who gave me the address where she was living with other people. It wasn't a very safe neighborhood. I took a bus and got off a few blocks from the place. I knocked on an iron door late at night, and a guy who barely looked at me opened the way. I entered a room full of candles, worn-out books, and the smell of incense. I recognized Faye sitting on a torn sofa, fiddling with an old cell phone. She raised her eyes and seeing me, looked surprised but not aggressive. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. I explained that I had been investigating why our parents treated her in such an unfair way. I also mentioned that I suspected there was an old secret, possibly something to do with her origin. At first, Faye laughed, saying she had no more patience for family matters. But she ended up confessing that she had always suspected she wasn't David's legitimate daughter. What she didn't understand was why our mother rejected her if she wasn't to blame for anything. I promised that when I discovered the whole truth, I would tell her. Before leaving, I risked a hug. She didn't exactly return it, but she didn't pull away either. I returned home with a racing heart, and shortly after, I finally got the confirmation I so feared. It was through a conversation with one of my aunts, who took pity on my anguish and told me the truth. My mother, when young, had been a victim of abuse by someone close. The result of this violence was Faye's pregnancy. My father, in love, decided to take responsibility for the situation, but never managed to really deal with the trauma. Worse, my mother, whenever she looked at Faye, remembered that horrible moment, which is why she maintained emotional distance, although she didn't directly blame her. Then something gnawed at me from the inside. Who had been the aggressor? I asked my aunt directly, but she said she couldn't say for sure. I felt there were more sordid details I needed to discover. I confronted my mother again, saying I knew about the abuse. She cried, denied it, begged me not to dig into that past. I felt she was almost giving in until finally, she admitted the perpetrator had been someone from my father's own family. I froze, asking if it had been an uncle, a cousin, or even a close friend. She looked at me in a way that made me feel a chill. It was Warren, she murmured, almost voiceless. Your paternal grandfather. The world seemed to collapse under my feet. What? My grandfather Warren. That serious old man who lived sitting on the porch of the farm and rarely showed emotion. He had attacked my mother and left her pregnant. It seemed impossible, but the devastated look in my mom's eyes left no doubt. I discovered she never had the courage to report him, that she feared losing my father, feared the reaction of the entire family. There was also the shame that consumed her, that terrible mark that prevented her from loving Faye as she should. And Dad never knew about this, I asked with a dry throat. He preferred to believe I had been attacked by a stranger, a man who would never be found, my mother replied. I thought it was better that way. I didn't want to ruin everything. But every time I look at Faye, I remember that night. It was terrible. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I ran to Faye's house and told her everything. She was paralyzed, and although her face showed deep pain, she didn't shed tears in front of me. She just said in a firm voice, "Enough running away. I'm going to confront that bastard." I tried to warn her it would be dangerous to confront Grandpa Warren without having a plan. She ignored me, saying she needed to look him in the eye and ask why he did it, how he could commit such a dirty act. Despite my fear, I went with her. We took a bus to the farm where my grandparents lived. My grandmother Louise received us with surprise, saying my grandfather was not feeling well. Faye didn't hesitate. "I'll call him myself." We entered the small house and found my grandfather sitting on an old sofa, wrapped in a blanket. He frowned when he saw Faye. I felt my heart in my mouth. She didn't make introductions. Why did you ruin my mother's life? Why did you bring me into the world if I wasn't wanted? He hesitated, stammered something incomprehensible. My grandmother appeared at the door, her face already panicking. Faye didn't lower her voice. "Grandpa Warren, we know what you did years ago." Do you think you can continue living in peace after everything? The shock overtook him. I expected him to make a scene, but he merely lowered his head. My grandmother began to tremble, not knowing what to do. He opened his mouth as if to say something and stopped. The scene was suffocating. It felt like the air weighed tons. Then Faye left the room, pushing the door abruptly. I followed her, stunned. On the way out, I heard my grandmother begging us to keep quiet for the family's sake. Faye didn't respond. I didn't have the strength for a discussion. We left, leaving a climate of desperation in the house. From that moment on, an immeasurable fury set in my sister. She told me she was going to look for a well-known woman in the area who did blessings, and according to rumors, dabbled in heavy witchcraft. I was afraid of that path, but I didn't want to abandon her after all her suffering. She began to frequent this lady's house, called Miss Martha, and invited me to go along. The place was sinister, walls full of symbols, candles of all sizes and colors, vials hanging from the ceiling. Miss Martha, a lady with very gray hair, didn't seem surprised when Faye explained what she wanted. "You seek revenge, don't you?" she asked with an enigmatic smile. Faye nodded. I just tried not to tremble. Miss Martha explained that this kind of work would have its price, that messing with negative energies involves risks. My sister didn't hesitate. "I want him to suffer. It's the least he deserves." I watched without the courage to protest as Miss Martha explained how the rituals would be. We would need something personal from our grandfather, a piece of clothing, a recent photo, and any object that had his trace. I wanted to back out, but Faye dragged me into that spiral of vengeance. Maybe deep down, I thought it was fair for my grandfather to pay for what he did. I remembered our mother, how she lived cowering, crying without being able to vent, and the miserable childhood Faye had. That's how, one afternoon, we returned surreptitiously to my grandparents' farm. They were on a visit to the doctor, according to rumors we heard from the neighbors. We entered their bedroom, ransacked the drawers, and took a wool shirt we knew belonged to my grandfather. I also searched a small box of photographs and found an image from a few months ago where he appeared sitting in the yard with a serious expression. That gave me chills. We left before any neighbor noticed. In the days that followed, Miss Martha taught us to prepare herbs and oils, and to make strange prayers in a language I didn't understand. The complete ritual would last 2 weeks, each phase consisting of lighting candles, reciting certain words, burning pieces of paper where we wrote Warren's name. Without my parents knowing, Faye and I met almost every night at the house of an acquaintance of hers, an abandoned place where they held mystical gatherings. There we followed the step-by-step given by Miss Martha. Each candle that went out, each syllable we pronounced seemed to fill the air with an indescribable weight. I dreamed of shadows, woke up sweating. Faye, on the other hand, seemed fueled by a latent anger that kept her firm. After a week, my grandmother Louise called my mother, distraught, saying my grandfather was having constant nightmares, waking up screaming, with inexplicable pains throughout his body. My father was concerned, but didn't understand anything. Mom asked him to visit my grandfather, but on the 2 occasions he promised to go, he ended up making excuses not to face his father directly. I suspected my father harbored an old suspicion, but didn't want to admit it. I knew what was happening, but didn't have the courage to tell the truth. So we continued the ritual. One night, I was so shaken by guilt that I almost gave up on following through with it. However, Faye grabbed me by the arm and said, "You can pretend none of this exists, but it was he who brought unhappiness to our home. Existence, Mom's trauma. You can't let this go unpunished." I opened my mouth to argue but couldn't. The images of my mother suffering and the memory of Faye's muffled cries during childhood spoke louder. I let her continue. It was like an abyss swallowing everyone. Shortly after, we were summoned to the farm by my grandmother, who begged for help because my grandfather couldn't get out of bed. He had mysterious bruises, fevers that came and went without explanation. When we arrived, we found Warren lying down, sweating, with deep dark circles under his eyes. He looked at us as if seeing ghosts. Faye approached coldly and murmured something I couldn't hear completely, but I realized it was some kind of threat or demand. My grandfather tried to babble some remorse, but my sister turned to me and said, "There's no medicine that cures evil." It was such a tense scene that I had to go out to the yard and catch my breath. I saw my grandmother Louise on her knees, praying softly, desperate. She begged us to contain our anger, said my grandfather was paying for his sins, that we shouldn't tell my father anything because it would destroy him. Indeed, Dad continued in ignorance, without knowing about the abuse. He believed his father had some rare disease. Mom remained silent, equally shaken. I didn't notice in her any desire to stop the course of that suffering. Over the following weeks, my grandfather's health deteriorated rapidly. Doctors couldn't find a diagnosis. My father, after much insistence from my mother, finally began to visit him. He returned home distraught, saying it didn't make sense. But when the conversation approached revealing something deeper, he fell silent. Faye and I avoided asking questions. We just exchanged complicit glances, laden with anguish. Despite the revolt and everything he had caused, seeing my grandfather that way also brought me a disturbing feeling. The certainty that we were playing with something dangerous. Yes, there was a part of me that wanted him to pay for his crimes, but at the same time, the fear of crossing all limits consumed me. Shortly before completing the 2 weeks of the ritual, Faye warned that this would be the last night of spells, the culmination of the work. Trembling, I went with her to the isolated place, carrying what remained of the material. Miss Martha was waiting for us with a grave countenance. We did everything according to the instructions, without any explicit supernatural manifestation, but with hearts taken by a suffocating tension. When we finished, I felt as if an enormous weight had collapsed on me. Faye, on the other hand, seemed taken by a somber calm. She wasn't celebrating, but she was firm. The next morning, we received the phone call. My grandfather had died suddenly. My father, desperate, said he had an acute crisis of something no one could define. Not even the doctors at the rural hospital could explain it properly. The family gathered for the funeral. My grandmother Louise cried nonstop, could barely stand. My father was incredulous, repeating that Warren had no history of serious illnesses. Mom watched the funeral from a distance, with teary eyes but without expressing herself. As for Faye, she had a pale face and an expression that mixed guilt and relief. I stayed by her side in silence. I felt a lump in my throat. I managed to hear my grandmother say to me, He paid for what he did. But then Mom pulled her away, trying to console her. Dad remained unaware of what really happened. For him, his father had been a victim of some sudden illness. Faye, Mom, and I kept that secret. Miss Martha never sought us out again to talk about the ritual. And although Faye continued to have an interest in occult matters, I noticed that after achieving her revenge, she set aside the incessant thirst to resort to more sinister practices. Over time, my mother, relieved of the dread of encountering her aggressor at every family gathering, began to have a slightly more affectionate attitude toward Faye. It wasn't immediate or dramatic. In the first few days, she just invited her to lunch or asked if she needed anything. It wasn't overwhelming love, but at least it showed remorse for years of distancing. I believe she wanted to somehow repair what was possible, albeit late. My sister agreed to come back to live with us, even making it clear she had no expectation of a normal mother-daughter relationship. She resumed her studies, albeit without great enthusiasm, but it was enough to avoid the self-destructive path she was treading. As for me, I tried to get closer again. I made it clear that despite having been the privileged daughter, I never wished her harm. Faye looked at me with sadness. I know. I just can't forget what happened. I understood then that some scars are too deep to ever completely disappear. She didn't blame me directly, but she carried a baggage of resentment and loneliness. We, however, began to talk more, to share some experiences. The old rift that had existed in childhood gave way to a kind of silent complicity. My grandmother Louise disappeared for a while, not wanting to talk to me or Faye. Maybe she blames us for her husband's death, but she can't prove anything. As for my maternal grandparents, ignoring the sordid details, they pretend to believe the version that my grandfather, Warren, died of a sudden illness. The family in general prefers to be silent, as if all that hell had never existed. My father to this day doesn't know that Faye was actually the daughter of his own father. He never deeply suspected, or if he did, he preferred not to see it. In the end, I resumed my routine. I continued studying, I graduated, but with a mark that will accompany me for the rest of my life. Whenever I remember Warren's face, consumed with terror on his deathbed, I wonder if we did the right thing. Could we have resolved it another way? But seeing Faye finding a minimum of peace and noticing that my mother no longer needs to evade the presence of her aggressor, I feel that part of that shadow has finally dissipated. At the same time, I carry the guilt for having participated, even if indirectly, in an act that borders on darkness. I continue living with this day after day. I learned that in many families, heavy secrets are buried but never cease to exist. They grow there like twisted roots underground, until they emerge at some point to shatter everything. And I also discovered that sometimes neglect and indifference can destroy as much as a brutal act. After all, if our parents had sought help, maybe Faye would never have followed the path of hatred. Today, the house breathes a strange serenity. Mom has crying spells, but then goes to cook something for Faye, trying to make up for lost time. Dad strives to be more present, but continues without knowing the greatest of all secrets. And I, who was always the favorite daughter, now see how much injustice and pain this represented for my sister. I try to give her strength, but I'm not sure if it will be enough. Life goes on, And sometimes I wonder if Faye will ever return to dabbling in witchcraft to settle scores. I can't predict the future, but I feel that if there is new suffering, she won't hesitate to act again in the shadows. In the end, all I can do is make sure the truth doesn't repeat itself like a cycle. Knowing that my sister was the product of an atrocity committed within our own family makes me question how far the hypocrisy of blood ties goes. Perhaps this story will be kept forever within the walls of our house. But I realized there is no pain that completely disappears. Just close your eyes to see again Faye's desperate look, my mother's agony, my grandfather's silent cynicism until the end of his days. I will forever carry the memory of each ritual, each candle flame consuming itself, each step we took toward a kind of justice that would not be accepted in any law. I think I learned the hard way that there are secrets that devour entire families, and that sometimes there is no way to escape. We can hide, sweep under the rug, but the pain returns one way or another. It finds its way, and when that happens, no one comes out unscathed. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to receive the next stories. Your presence is important, and your support is essential. Well, let's continue. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jack, and ever since I was born, I've lived in a small rural settlement nestled among rolling hills of red clay in the Appalachian foothills. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other by name, where generations of families have put down roots into the same soil. My parents, Thomas and Sarah, were always close despite our constant financial struggles. Dad worked renting small patches of land where he grew various vegetables, particularly carrots, potatoes, and corn, to sell at the Sunday farmers market. Mom stayed home, cooking on our old wood-burning stove and caring for us, her many children. There were 7 of us in total, including me, and Mom was pregnant again with her 8th child. The townsfolk would whisper that having so many mouths to feed wasn't a good idea. But my parents never let those comments influence their decisions. Dad always said that each child came into the world with their own fortune. As for me, at 12 years old, I wanted to help somehow. So I did small jobs for neighbors and handed all the coins I earned directly to my mother. I always considered myself a cheerful child. I had younger siblings to protect and guide. We slept on mattresses spread throughout one large room that served as our bedroom. The house was made of simple bricks without finishing touches and had a tin roof that made noise during heavy rain. At night, when the wind blew, we could hear it whistling through the cracks in the windows. This simplicity was our reality, and despite the difficulties, we found reasons to smile. However, there was something that always made me uncomfortable. Our neighbor, Agnes, who lived a few houses away. She was very reserved and somewhat bitter. The other families said that many years before moving there, Agnes had been in love with my father. He, however, never showed any interest, and this supposedly caused her to harbor a deep resentment against our family. Eventually, Agnes married a very violent man who drank and abused her. During one of these terrible fights, she became sterile. At least that's what spread among the nearby residents. Soon after, her husband disappeared, abandoning her. And so she remained in that house alone, with its peeling paint and garden overrun with weeds. Occasionally, my father would comment, "I think Agnes has her reasons for being in a bad mood. Life hasn't smiled at her." My mother, on the other hand, preferred to say nothing. The only thing I ever saw her do when crossing paths with Agnes was to greet her with a nod or a timid "good morning." The response almost always came in the form of a cold, silent look, if not a sarcastic comment like, "Another child, Sarah. Don't you ever get tired of bringing children into the world?" And then she would turn her back, leaving my mother with that saddened expression. As my mother's belly grew, Agnes's barbs became more frequent. There was a Sunday, for example, when my mother and I went to the market to see how Dad's sales were going. That day, Agnes showed up buying tomatoes and herbs. As soon as she saw us, she approached Mom and touched her belly without asking permission, shaking her head in disapproval. "When will you learn to say enough?" My mother just nodded slightly and continued choosing vegetables. I wanted to say something, but held back. I saw that it truly hurt her, and although she tried to stay calm, it was clear that Agnes caused discomfort. In the weeks that followed, Dad continued getting up before dawn to work in the fields. I went to school in the morning, and in the afternoon, I helped a lady named Mrs. Nelson, who had a small grocery store and needed someone to sweep the floor, organize bags of rice, or weigh beans at the counter. It wasn't much, but everything I earned I gave to Mom. Once Mrs. Nelson brought up Agnes while we were organizing flour bags. "Did you know, Jack, that Agnes tried to have children but never could? People are saying she found a way to, how can I put it, mess with strange things so she won't see anyone happier than her." Mrs. Nelson gave me a concerned look, as if afraid she'd gone too far with her comments. I just nodded and changed the subject, although it had left me uneasy. Things really started getting strange on a hot afternoon when I came home from school and found my mother pale-skinned and sweating profusely. She said everything was fine, but she didn't look fine at all. She asked me to help in the kitchen, so I went to cut some vegetables while my younger siblings played in the yard. The house was small, with a narrow hallway leading to a backyard where we kept some potted plants and a makeshift chicken coop. While I was cutting carrots, I heard a scream from the backyard. It was my youngest brother, Matthew. "Jack, come see this." I ran there and found him paralyzed before a horrifying scene. A dead toad with its mouth sewn shut by a dark thread full of knots, thrown right near the flower pots. Besides the closed mouth, the creature was missing its eyes, and its legs were twisted in an unnatural way. I felt my stomach turn immediately. My 5-year-old brother wouldn't stop crying. I tried to stay calm, grabbed a piece of cloth, wrapped up the toad, and ran to the kitchen to show Mom carefully. She put her hand to her mouth, horrified, and sat down in a chair trying to hold back vomit. "Throw that away, Jack, for God's sake. Get rid of it right now." I did as she asked, crossed the yard, and threw the bundle in a place far from our house, in a small thicket that nobody usually frequented. I came back feeling a chill down my spine, because I knew it was a disturbing warning. I had heard that this kind of thing could be linked to witchcraft, or some kind of macabre ritual. The next day, our neighbor, Mr. Howard, a man of great faith, heard about the incident and shook his head in disapproval. "These are works to bring down the family." I saw something similar at a relative's house. It turned into a terrible mess afterward, I tried to stay strong, but I had constant nightmares remembering the eyeless, mouthless toad, all sewn up. A few days later, we noticed another bizarre sign. Early in the morning, I found a small cloth bag tied with a dark cord on the living room window. I opened it out of curiosity, and a fetid smell invaded the air. Inside was a heap of dead herbs pierced with small thorns, and a kind of thick oil dripping. My mother, who could barely walk because of the weight of her belly, had a coughing fit and felt nauseous when she saw it. "For God's sake, son, throw that in the trash," she begged, terrified. I threw it away, and once again, we felt that lump in our throats whenever someone commented on who might be doing this. Agnes's name came up. We had no proof, but her behavior, combined with rumors that she harbored hatred against us, made her the prime suspect. Dad, already tired of hearing so many stories, decided to act. We didn't have money to deal with lawyers or authorities, and it wouldn't help to call the police to investigate a suspicious little bag. It was then that a friend of Dad's, Raymond, suggested we seek out Mrs. Evans, an experienced local healer who also worked as a midwife. He said, if there's anyone who understands these things about spells and envy, it's Mrs. Evans. She helps women in complicated births, but she also knows how to ward off the evil eye. We had no other option, so Dad and Mom agreed that as soon as the pregnancy was more advanced, we would count on the healer's services. My mother, increasingly weary, spent sleepless nights saying she felt a presence around the house. She would whisper, fearing she'd wake the younger siblings, but I heard her perfectly. "Jack, I feel like someone is spying on me through the window. Sometimes I think I hear footsteps in the yard." I calmed her as best I could, but inside, I was scared too. I tried to convince myself it was just a product of her imagination, overtaxed by the tension of pregnancy and recent scares. When there was about a month left until the birth, we finally decided to seek out Mrs. Evans. We went on a stuffy morning just after sunrise. Her house was on a rutted dirt path behind a small cornfield. The facade was simple, but the yard had various herbs hanging to dry and piles of glass bottles with colored liquids. Mrs. Evans was a lady of uncertain age, with gray hair tied in a bun and a firm gaze. She examined my mother quickly and stated, "Your baby is due to be born soon. You're weak, but there's still time to recover some energy. I'll give you some teas that help strengthen you." Dad took the opportunity to ask if she knew any way to ward off bad intentions. She looked at us with the air of someone who knew much more than she was saying. "I'll do a spiritual cleansing for now, but call me when it's time for the birth. There's something very heavy lurking around your house." We left there with a thread of hope. Mom clutched the envelope of herbs that Mrs. Evans had given her, and Dad tried to show confidence. However, nothing alleviated the feeling that a tragedy was coming. A few days later, in the early morning, my mother's screams of pain woke me with a start. I ran to my parents' room and found her writhing, sweating profusely. Dad looked at me anxiously. "Go get Mrs. Evans now." I didn't even dress properly. I ran out, crossing the dirt road. Fear consumed me, especially when passing in front of Agnes's house, which was plunged into darkness. With each step, I felt my heart pulsing in alert, as if at any moment she might emerge from some corner to stare at me with those cold eyes. Fortunately, I arrived unharmed at the healer's house, who was already waiting at the door as if she had sensed what was happening. She grabbed her bag and followed me without saying much. When we returned, we found Mom moaning with labored breathing. Mrs. Evans examined her and made a worried expression. This child wants to be born now, but it's too early. Dad ran to heat water and separate clean cloths. Mrs. Evans spread incense around the room, reciting softly. My younger siblings, frightened, tried to peek through the door crack. My mother started screaming in pain, and the healer asked everyone to leave to make space. I stayed in the living room, hugging Matthew and the others, not knowing exactly how to comfort them. The rain came suddenly, hitting hard on the roof, and the wind seemed like it would tear off the tiles at any moment. It blew so intensely that the living room door slammed shut, making the brick walls tremble. The storm mingled with Mom's screams and Mrs. Evans's prayers. "Strength, Sarah. Push it out," I heard the healer's firm voice. I remained motionless, hoping everything would go well. There was a suffocating air in the house, as if a shadow hovered over us. At one point, the screams ceased. There was absolute silence, except for the noise of the rain and wind. I took courage and opened the bedroom door slowly. The scene I saw marked me forever. Mom was lying with a pale face marked by pain. Dad held her hand, his countenance filled with despair. Mrs. Evans held a small bundle in her arms. It was the baby who had been born, but made no sound. I approached, and the healer looked at me with a silent warning, as if she didn't want me to see. However, I couldn't help it. The cloth wrapping the newborn slipped a little, revealing parts of its small body. It was all twisted, as if it lacked bones, and the little face didn't have the normal features of a baby. The eyes were closed by stuck skin, and the mouth appeared sealed. There was also a strange smell, half sweet, but at the same time rotten. I immediately backed away, feeling nausea and a terror I had never experienced. My mother, realizing what had happened, began to sob. Dad pushed me away so I wouldn't see any more. But that fraction of a second had been enough to make me understand that something very serious had occurred. The baby had not survived. Mrs. Evans, with a heavy voice, turned to Dad. "It's a type of very powerful spell. Someone here doesn't want to see this family grow." Mom fainted from exhaustion. Dad covered his mouth, stifling a scream of anger and pain. We didn't know what to do or where to turn. I, just a boy, felt my world collapse right there in the middle of that small house. The storm continued with force, and lightning illuminated the sky as if nature shared in our despair. Later that same early morning, Mrs. Evans took charge of cleaning the room and lighting candles. She commented that it wouldn't be good to draw the neighbors' attention or raise rumors for now. My father still considered notifying the authorities for a record, but the costs and bureaucracy seemed impossible to him at that hour, and there was the fear of spreading more malicious rumors. In the urgency and shock, he decided to bury the baby discreetly in a deserted plot, in an action that, however sad, seemed the only alternative. I remember sitting on the doorstep, listening to the rain gradually diminish, crying silently for that sibling I would never get to know. In the days that followed, Mom isolated herself, refusing to talk about what had happened. Her physical health improved a bit, but emotionally she remained shaken. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming that she heard baby cries, running down the hallway calling for the little one who would never arrive. Dad tried to console her, but he had also become a bitter and quiet man. When he left for the field, many times I heard him take the bottle of whiskey he kept behind the stove. The bitter sip seemed to keep him standing for a few more hours of work. The news of what happened, though not completely, spread. The comments were that the 8th child had been born premature and died. But some knew the story of witchcraft that surrounded our house and Agnes as the one responsible. Each time we crossed paths with her, we felt an almost palpable tension. And most surprisingly, Agnes began to behave differently. Sometimes she even tried to smile, although it was an empty smile that made us even more suspicious. Mrs. Evans visited us several times, saying prayers and blessing Mom with sprigs of rue and rosemary. She explained that the evil that was cast can reverse to whoever sent it, especially if the affected family resorted to spiritual cleansing practices. I didn't fully understand how it worked, but the way she talked made it clear that the person who had done so much harm might end up paying a high price. It wasn't long before the settlement commented on another novelty. Agnes, supposedly sterile, was pregnant. It was a shock to everyone, and I couldn't help but think of the supposed reversal that Mrs. Evans talked about. Some residents said that perhaps she had never been sterile, just had difficulty getting pregnant in the past. Others guaranteed that there was something supernatural involved. Anyway, people were scared, wondering how Agnes, who said she couldn't have children, now displayed a growing belly. At the same time, rumors ran that the man who lived with her had left, abandoning her as soon as he learned of the pregnancy. The story seemed to repeat itself in a tragic way. Meanwhile, Mom tried to resume a minimal routine, cooking beans and rice each day, washing clothes in the makeshift tank in the yard. I helped her whenever possible, but I saw in her eyes a perennial sadness. Dad, for his part, returned to the field before the sun rose and arrived at night exhausted, almost without exchanging words. Somewhere in his heart, there was a flame of anger he directed at Agnes, but also guilt. After all, he thought he could have done something to protect Mom and the baby. The months dragged on. Agnes appeared little on the street, as if she were ashamed or fearing judgments. There were days when I spotted her from the window, holding her now very prominent belly, and she would glance at me. Her face was even paler, her hair disheveled. She looked quite different from the woman who once cast defiant looks at us. It was impossible to know if she regretted what she had done, or if she harbored even more resentment. Until one stuffy morning, we woke up to chatter in the street. The few neighbors were gathered in front of Agnes's house, which had its door closed and windows locked. An older woman said she smelled something rotten coming from inside. The bravest men forced the lock until they broke in. Dad and I got close, curious, and at the same time terrified of what we would discover. The odor was so unbearable that many covered their noses or backed away in disgust. That's when, inside, they found Agnes on the kitchen floor, dead for several days, judging by the state of decomposition. She seemed to have fallen suddenly, hit her head on some corner. There was no one to help her, and she simply lay there while her body rotted in the suffocating heat. We also learned that the baby in her belly did not survive. a tragedy of immense proportions. Several of those who entered the house became sick, and the news spread rapidly. Some said it was divine justice. Others, more pious, prayed for her soul. I, for my part, couldn't help but remember Mrs. Evans's words. Evil, when cast against innocence, returns to the sender in an implacable manner. Agnes's burial was quick and silent. Almost no one attended, except for some curious onlookers and the authorities responsible for registering the death. Nobody openly talked about the possibility of witchcraft, but it was a thought that hung in the air. After a while, the house was emptied, and soon a family from outside appeared who apparently knew nothing of all that passed to buy the property. Mom made no great comment regarding Agnes, but I noticed that for a few days she returned to having nightmares. Dad, for his part, implied that the matter was closed. Still, all of us carried the weight of that tragic experience, and especially the marks of the resentment that surrounded us for so long. With Agnes's death, the routine of the settlement slowly began to return to what it was before. But the silence that remained was almost palpable in our house. Mrs. Evans continued visiting, bringing tea to strengthen my mother and encouraging the family to move forward. She repeated, "We need to close this cycle. Let's light candles, pray, put an amulet on the door. Whatever Agnes did no longer has power here." Dad accepted the suggestion, and on a quiet night, we spread holy water in the corners of the yard and positioned a small wreath of branches at the entrance. Mom cried discreetly during the ritual, remembering our baby who was gone. Even so, I could feel a certain relief in her eyes, as if we were finally saying goodbye to all that horror. The months passed, and our life continued. I went back to studying and helping at Mrs. Nelson's store. My siblings gradually went back to playing, albeit with some care not to mess with more remote places in the yard. Dad dedicated himself to planting, and Mom regained her affectionate way with everyone, although she never again became exactly the same person. Sometimes I would find her sitting on the small bench in the yard, looking at the sky pensively. Then I would approach, try to talk, but she would limit herself to holding my hand, thanking me for the company. Once I asked her if she still heard baby cries in the dead of night. She just shook her head no, with tears forming in the corners of her eyes. I preferred not to insist, but I understood that she kept inside a deep wound that might never completely heal, though at least the pain had calmed. When I remember everything, it seems like a distant nightmare. The mutilated toad, the cloth bag, the terrifying birth, Agnes's death. However, I still carry in my memory the certainty that envy and resentment can lead people to terrible acts, and that evil, one way or another, finds its way back to those who spread it. It's not a lesson I enjoy learning, but it's something that makes me value the union of my family. Even surrounded by scarcity, we have each other, and it was this union that kept us from falling forever into a spiral of hatred. Sometimes when I go out to help Dad work in the corn plantation, looking at the horizon where the red hills stretch endlessly, I wonder if I'll ever forget those dark days we lived through. Nobody comments about Agnes anymore, as if it were an old story that doesn't deserve remembrance. But I don't forget the marks left by that spell and by blind rage. They still live in my memory, a silent warning that certain boundaries of evil should not be crossed, and especially that one should not underestimate the power of a heart consumed by envy. I never thought my simple life, guided by hard work and honesty, would take such an uncertain turn, filled with so much unease. I always believed that bills were paid through hard work, and that shortcuts were never worth it. With limited education and few opportunities, I spent my life jumping from job to job, trying to maintain my dignity while bills and unexpected expenses multiplied. When reality became unbearable and the lack of prospects cornered me, I met someone who promised to change everything. Looking back now, I realize my greatest mistake was accepting that invitation. My name is Alex. From an early age, I heard people say that only those with connections, or those willing to risk everything beyond reasonable limits, ever succeed. I never agreed with that mindset, but when necessity speaks louder than reason, we lower our defenses. It was precisely during this moment of desperation that I received a visit from an acquaintance named Marcus. He invited me to a private gathering in the historic district of New Orleans. He explained little, only mentioning that influential people would be present, and that if I were shrewd, I might leave with a proposal that could help me make a financial leap. I didn't ask many details, because hunger and the stack of overdue notices on my table screamed louder than common sense. On the appointed night, a foggy Thursday in late October, I dressed in the most presentable clothes I had. A second-hand suit I'd bought on clearance. Even so, it gave me the feeling of being someone, minimally respectable. I took the streetcar and then walked through dimly lit streets until I reached an ancient mansion, well preserved despite its age. From the sidewalk, I could see it was a luxurious place with an imposing facade, and an entrance hall filled with elaborate iron sculptures. Even without knowing exactly where this would lead, I entered with my heart pounding. Approaching the reception, I showed the invitation Marcus had secured for me, and was directed to a ballroom at the end of a wide corridor, where the aroma of expensive cologne mixed with the sound of soft jazz. I felt out of place, like an intruder in a world that wasn't mine. Many people circulated through the room, all well-dressed and conversing with a confidence I could never possess. While looking for a corner to stay without drawing attention, a deep voice interrupted me. "You must be Alexander. I heard you were looking for a better opportunity in life." I turned and faced a middle-aged woman wearing an impeccable burgundy suit. She had a serious demeanor and a confident posture. I immediately perceived she wasn't an ordinary person. I composed myself to try to respond appropriately. "Yes, They told me this might be a place of opportunities." "You must be." She offered her hand with a slight smile. "My name is Elise, but don't stand on formality. Let's talk a bit." With little choice, Elise led me to a more secluded table where she pulled out a chair for me before sitting down. The music in the background and the noise of conversations became an almost imperceptible backdrop as she spoke. "They say you have talent, but never had the right chance. Is that true? Well, I've just been working where I can. It's difficult to stand out when you don't have education and don't know the right people." She nodded, fixing her eyes on mine. "And how far would you be willing to go to change that reality?" I felt a chill run down my spine. The question seemed simple, but carried enormous weight. Still, I answered sincerely. I'd do whatever necessary, as long as it was something honest. Elise maintained her smile, but something in her gaze became more opaque. Honesty is a relative concept, Alexander. There are shorter and less bureaucratic paths to achieving what you want, but they require courage. They demand sacrifices that most people aren't willing to make. Before I could fully understand, she handed me a card. There was only a name and an address. I couldn't disguise my bewilderment. And where will this lead me? She stood up, adjusted her jacket, and simply said, "If you really want to change your life, go to this place tonight at midnight. Don't be late." She left, leaving me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The ballroom clock marked just after 11 at night when I decided to leave. That meeting brought me nothing concrete, just an enigmatic address and a feeling that I was entering something much bigger than I could comprehend. I walked to a rideshare pickup point and headed for the indicated location. We passed through increasingly deserted streets, and at one point, the driver asked if I was sure about the destination. I just nodded, even though I wasn't sure of anything. We arrived at a dark road that extended beyond the city limits and advanced through a region with few houses and empty lots. Finally, I spotted an iron gate. Paying the driver with the last bills I had left, I got out of the car and observed the area around me. Tall shrubs, a poorly lit dirt path, and in the background, an old manor house, apparently well preserved despite its ominous air. The gate opened with a creak, inviting me to enter. With careful steps, I followed to the main door, which was ajar. I pushed it cautiously. An extensive corridor revealed itself, illuminated by yellowish-toned lamps. Soon I saw Elise standing at the end, waiting for me. She raised her arm to greet me. "I'm glad you came." I entered without knowing exactly what to say. There were few people in the manor, and all seemed involved in discreet conversations. Elise led me to an adjacent room that, by its decoration, resembled an adapted ballroom. Inside, I noticed a table covered with a dark fabric, and on it were some strange objects that looked like ancient books, yellowed notebooks, and what appeared to be a kind of iron bowl. "What is all this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Elise approached. "This is where you'll formalize your desire to prosper. This place usually receives people who, like you, want to leave behind a life of failures." "Formalize how?" She touched the thickest book with a gray cover. "With a signature." For an instant I hesitated. My common sense screamed that there was something very strange about this proposal. However, the memory of my empty bank account and the pile of debts tightened my chest. Elise noticed my doubt and added, "You're here because you want real changes, aren't you? There isn't always time to evaluate everything in detail. Think about what's worse, continuing as you are or risking a new path." I laughed nervously, imagining it was some kind of partnership document or something similar. Then she handed me a fountain pen with dark, almost black ink. "Read before signing," she said, without averting her gaze. I opened the book and saw texts written in archaic language. I didn't understand some of the words, as if they were from an ancient dialect. My name, however, was clearly printed on the page that Elise indicated to me. Fear began to set in, but at the same time, hunger, bills, and the certain future weighed even more. I hesitated for a few seconds, inwardly questioning whether I should really do this. Finally, I signed with a trembling hand, not knowing exactly what I was doing. The silence that followed was disturbing. I felt a slight buzzing in my ears, like a vacuum that swallows the sound of the environment. Elise closed the book carefully and congratulated me. "Now you're part of something greater. I'll have someone contact you. For tonight, you can go rest." I didn't have the courage to ask anything else. The sensation of something out of the ordinary accompanied me as I left the manor. I took a streetcar back downtown, trying to rationalize what had just happened. I fell asleep late that night, my thoughts divided between the hope of a better future and the apprehension about what I had just signed. The strange thing is that the next morning began with the first sign of an unexpected benefit. An old contact of mine from a tech company called, offering temporary work with a payment that would help clear urgent debts. It wasn't much, but it gave me relief I hadn't seen in a long time. Throughout the day, I received more calls from companies where I'd left resumes months ago without any success until then. Suddenly, everything seemed to flow. Despite still being suspicious, I concluded that this pact might really be opening doors. I had no idea that this apparent help would come with a much greater price. It was only after lunch that I noticed the first strange sign. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I noticed a subtle delay in my reflection. I blinked quickly to test, and the image took a moment to blink back. I convinced myself it was an illusion caused by fatigue. I went downtown to resolve some pending matters, and while walking through the streets, I noticed that people seemed to observe me differently. Maybe it was just paranoia, but that feeling of being watched accompanied me all afternoon. At dusk, while waiting for the streetcar to stop, I felt my phone vibrate. It was a message from an unknown number, Alexander. "Don't try to evade the conditions. Your signature cannot be reversed." I froze, staring at the device's screen. I even replied, asking who it was, but there was no response. I thought it prudent to delete the message, but of course, I didn't forget what was written. My torment began there. Gradually, the anomalies accumulated. My reflection continued to exhibit behaviors subtly out of sync. On quick occasions, I thought I saw my face in window glass smile in a way I hadn't. One night on the living room television, the image froze, displaying for a few moments a snippet of an old newspaper, as if time had leaped backward. Not everyone would notice something so subtle, but I was on edge and noticed every detail. Still, I continued living life. I needed to pretend normalcy at work. My colleagues noticed I was quieter, but no one dared to ask much. Only one friend, Jen, noticed my uneasiness and pulled me aside. "Is everything okay, Alex? You've been acting strange. You don't even seem to pay attention to conversations. Did something happen?" I tried to disguise it. "Just some financial problems. You know how it is." She studied me for a few seconds as if she didn't completely believe me, but didn't insist. If I told her, I'd be called crazy, and deep down, I was already doubting what I was seeing. A little more than a week later, I received a phone call from Elise. The number was unknown, but that voice was unmistakable. "Alexander, how do you feel these last few days?" I hesitated. "I feel confused. I don't think I can understand what's happening to me. It's normal. When we accept certain conditions, we go through adjustments. But don't worry, Everything will become clearer soon. You'll receive signs of what you gained by signing the agreement. What agreement is this, after all? I asked without hiding my desperation. You'll know when you're ready, she ended the call. That only served to worsen my state of anxiety. The next day, upon waking, I went to the bedroom mirror and noticed my image staring at me with eyes wide open before I even approached. The shock made me take a step back. I blinked several times until the reflection seemed to align with my movements. I didn't know if I had gone crazy or if there really was something there, a lapse in synchrony that wasn't natural. As days passed, the feeling that something was following me became undeniable. In moments of distraction, I thought I saw a figure in the elevator mirror in my building. But when I looked directly, it disappeared. The nights became dense and the silence frightening. There came a point where I would wake up in the middle of the night and feel as if my heart was going to stop. On 2 occasions, I tried to call Marcus, the acquaintance who took me to that event, but he never returned my calls. In an attempt to find some way out, I decided to visit an elderly lady who lived in the same neighborhood as me. Ms. Viola was known for her prayers and blessings. Even without fully believing in these things, I needed to cling to some hope. I told her I had been experiencing a terrible sensation, that I couldn't sleep, and that I had the impression of no longer being alone when I looked in the mirror. She looked at me with some pity, and without hesitating handed me a small wooden amulet. Try to keep this close to your body. I won't ask for details, but I sense you've gotten involved with something heavy. If you want advice, Alexander, it's not enough just to carry an amulet. There's a price to be paid for certain choices. I thanked her for her kindness, but left without relief. The words, "there's a price to be paid," kept echoing in my head. One of the strangest episodes happened on a Tuesday morning. I used to leave early to catch the streetcar and arrive at work on time. But when passing by the turnstile, I looked at the reflection in the protective glass and almost screamed. My image was standing still, with the mouth slightly open, while I continued moving. For a second, I stood motionless, waiting for the reflection to imitate me. When this happened, it took long enough for my heart to race. That day, I missed work. I didn't have the psychological conditions to pretend normalcy. Wandering the streets, I sat on a park bench trying to understand what was happening to me. I recapped in my mind the entire sequence of events. My financial difficulty, the mysterious meeting, the signing of a book I barely comprehended. I remembered Elise's vague promises and realized I had received nothing beyond small glimpses of luck, far less than the price I was paying. Where were the promises to improve life? On the contrary, everything around me seemed to be crumbling. I decided I needed to face the situation head-on. I took the card Elise had given me, the same one showing the Manor's address, and resolved to return there. It was already night when I gathered the courage. I passed through dark alleys until I found the same iron gate. This time I knocked several times, but no one answered. I pushed the gate, which, like before, was just leaning closed. I advanced to the main door and tapped the metal knocker. Nothing. The silence was frightening. I entered the manor, which apparently was empty. The corridors were dark. Only some wall lamps projected elongated shadows. The room where I signed, the book seemed to have been dismantled. I saw no sign of Elise, nor of the table, nor of objects. A desolate emptiness took over every corner. Suddenly, I felt a chill and heard a crack coming from the end of the corridor. I went to check, but what I found was a locked door. Through the windows, I noticed that some parts of the hall were covered by cloths and boxes, as if someone had vacated the place in a hurry. I was about to leave when I noticed some loose sheets on the floor. I picked one up and saw that it had inscriptions that referred to those in the book where I signed my name. Enigmatic words I couldn't decipher. I folded the sheet and put it in my pocket. On the way back, I passed through the empty room again and thought I saw a silhouette standing next to one of the columns. I ran there, but there was no one. I couldn't say if that was a product of my fear or if there really was someone watching me. I returned home so shaken that I couldn't think of anything else. I decided to take a cold shower and try to sleep. But upon entering the bathroom, the light began to flicker insistently. I felt the room temperature suddenly drop, and the mirror, already fogged by the vapor, revealed for an instant a dark figure behind me. I turned in a start, but only found the bare wall. My heart almost came out through my mouth. In the following weeks, the climate was one of total restlessness. People around me distanced themselves, noticing that my behavior was not normal. No one said anything directly, but I saw in their looks a mixture of pity and fear. Even at work, rumors began to emerge that I might be using some substance or going through psychiatric problems. My boss called me to talk, but I couldn't formulate a convincing excuse. I asked for a few days off and locked myself at home. The worst moment came when, on a night of total insomnia, I faced the bedroom mirror. The reflection was motionless, with its back to me, as if it were another body present in the room. I took a deep breath, gathering the rest of courage that remained in me, and took a few steps forward. As soon as I approached, that silhouette turned, displaying a face that, although it was mine, had empty eyes and a distorted smile. The lamp flickered, and I smelled something strange, like mold and damp earth. "Alexander," said a voice in my head that I knew wasn't mine. "It's time to recognize that you no longer belong to yourself." I wanted to scream, but a blockage prevented me from emitting any sound. I felt my legs fail and fell to my knees. The reflection advanced in my direction, and for a second I thought it would cross through the glass and take my place. I closed my eyes, waiting for an impact that didn't come. When I opened them, the mirror only returned the image of my empty room, but the certainty that there was something there, a presence that would accompany me forever, took root in me. Today, I try to live life without completely falling apart, but I know that everything has changed irreversibly. The simple act of looking in the mirror has become a test of courage, because I never know what I'll find. On certain days, I avoid reflections, cover mirrors, or turn off the bathroom lights before entering. I've lost count of how many times I've tried to pray, to beg that it was a dream from which I could wake up. However, everything indicates there is no escape. I receive now and then enigmatic messages on my phone, as if they were from Elise, but they never clearly identify themselves. They remind me of the chance I supposedly gained, although I see no benefit in it. Perhaps at some incomprehensible level, this form of life beyond the ordinary means some advantage that I still haven't been able to see. But deep down, I feel that I lost my identity. and what remains is only the shadow of who I once was. Reporting all this here is my last attempt to expose the truth about what I've lived. If someday I disappear or seem to change personality in a radical way, let it be recorded. The pact I signed wasn't just a financial contract or something similar. It was a surrender of my being to a force I don't understand. And although many people say easy paths don't exist, I learned in the worst way that when they appear, the price to be paid can be your very soul. If I've made it this far, it's because I'm still fighting, but I don't know how long I'll be able to resist. My image in reflections seems to gain more freedom, while I feel I'm losing control of my actions. Perhaps soon I'll be nothing more than a puppet of something darker that watches me from the other side of the mirror. For now, I continue writing, recording every detail, and if this account reaches other people, I hope it serves as a warning. There's no miracle that doesn't charge its price, nor shortcut that doesn't demand its tribute. Every time I think about freeing myself, I remember the night when, on impulse and desperation, I believed in the promises of an elegant woman, without understanding that I was dealing with something beyond human comprehension. This is the destiny I chose, or that was imposed on me from the moment I dipped my pen in the dark ink and signed my name in that book. And now, the reflection that stares at me in the mirror no longer belongs to me, and my voice echoes like a lament in the hope that someone, somewhere, will hear it and learn not to repeat my mistakes. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every day here. Hope to see you in the next ones. On screen now, I'm leaving 2 other good videos that I know you'll enjoy. See you there. I never considered myself the perfect believer. I believed in God, sure, but you wouldn't find me in church every Sunday. Easter service, Christmas Eve Mass, maybe an Ash Wednesday every few years. That was the extent of my devotion. Professor of literature by trade, I spent more time analyzing religious texts than actually practicing their teachings. That was before a sleep-deprived truck driver decided my sedan would look better compressed to half its size. I don't remember much about the crash or my time in the hospital afterward. This story isn't about that. This story is about what I experienced during the 6 minutes and 12 seconds when my heart stopped beating. One moment I was driving down Lakeside Avenue, grading oral presentations in my head while waiting for the light to change. The next moment came a sickening lurch, a deafening crash, and then darkness. When I saw light again, a soft glow at the end of what seemed like an endless tunnel, I knew what had happened. My academic mind had always been skeptical about near-death experiences, dismissing them as oxygen-deprived hallucinations. But there I was, drawn toward that gentle radiance, oddly unafraid despite leaving behind a life half-lived. I'd spent 40 years studying human stories. Perhaps it was time to discover the ending of my own. So I moved toward the light, and suddenly I had form again. I could feel a cool breeze against my skin, and soft fabric draped over my body. Loose-fitting clothes in a shade of white, so pure it seemed to glow. The lines that years of squinting at manuscripts had carved around my eyes were gone. My skin felt impossibly smooth. If I'd had a mirror, I suspect I would have seen myself as I was at 25. before tenure and divorce had taken their toll. Finally done admiring your new outfit. The voice startled me. It sounded too casual, too normal for what I assumed was a profound cosmic event. Sorry, I replied, it's just a lot to take in. Wait, where are you? I can't quite, I'm right here. The voice came from my right. As my vision adjusted, I could make out a silhouette against the encompassing light. The brightness dimmed enough for me to see another person dressed in similar loose white clothing, but with one striking difference. His hair was an electric green that seemed to pulse with its own inner light, and intricate patterns that resembled constellations snaked up his neck and across his forearms. "Can you see me now?" he asked. "I could hear you the whole time," I replied, confused by the question. He grinned. "Sorry, bad joke. My social skills get rusty when most people I meet can't talk back." I stared at him, trying to place something familiar in his strange appearance. "Are you quoting something?" I asked, my professor's instinct to identify references kicking in. "An old meme. Cell phone reception. Can you hear me now?" "No." His shoulders slumped slightly. "I keep forgetting how long I've been here." As my vision cleared completely, I could see the intricate details of his tattoos, constellations, nebulae, and cosmic phenomena rendered with impossible precision across his skin. They seemed to shift subtly when he moved, as if they were living star maps. "Wait, how long has it been for you?" I asked. He gave me a wry smile. "After you've been here a while, you realize time doesn't really mean anything. Not like it did back there, here." "You mean heaven?" The green-haired man barked a quick laugh. "Yeah, heaven." I looked around at the endless whiteness stretching in every direction, with nothing else visible besides my strange companion and myself. "I'm Noah, by the way, Liam." My eyes had fully adjusted now, but there was still nothing to see beyond the blank whiteness. "So, is heaven just standing around with you in this white void for eternity?" Liam looked at me, something like sadness crossing his features. "No, it's not." I was about to ask what he meant when I felt a sudden shifting, that stomach-dropping sensation you get on a roller coaster at the moment of free fall. Instantaneously, a massive structure materialized before us where nothing had been before. Towering crystalline spires in shades of emerald and jade stretched upward far beyond my ability to see their tops. Between them stood iridescent walls that seemed to be made of polished stone shot through with veins of glowing green light. The entire structure pulsed with a gentle rhythm, like a heartbeat. "What the?" I stumbled backward, nearly falling from the sudden onset of vertigo as immense walls appeared from nowhere. "That," Liam gestured toward the wall with a defeated wave, "is where we're going." Unfortunately, I noticed a more intense light emanating from atop the wall and pointed toward it. "What's that light?" He glanced up briefly. "Don't look directly at it unless you want the worst migraine of your afterlife." I stared as the light grew brighter, more concentrated. Within its core, I could make out something like wings, but not feathered wings as depicted in Renaissance paintings. These were geometric patterns of pure energy, folding in upon themselves in impossible ways. I thought I caught a glimpse of faces, multiple faces, all superimposed, one like a lion, another reminiscent of an eagle, yet another almost human but not quite. A voice thundered from the light as it descended closer. vibrating through my very essence rather than my ears. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, multiple overlapping realities contained in one being. Billions of eyes opening and closing across its surface, like galaxies blinking in and out of existence. "Look away," I heard Liam hiss urgently beside me. My mind was fragmenting, trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. Did this entity have 40 wings or 4,000? Were those faces, or were they windows into other dimensions? How could something be simultaneously solid and gaseous? And my head jerked downward suddenly, as if pulled by an invisible force. My thoughts returned to me in a rush of clarity. Forgive the soul, guardian. He's new and doesn't understand our protocols. Liam spoke from beside me, his voice taking on a formal tone I hadn't heard before. We seek passage through the eastern gate. I am escorting him to his appointed place. I felt the heat of intense scrutiny, like standing too close to the sun. The light wasn't just illuminating me, it was penetrating me, examining every thought, every action, every moment of my life. A failed marriage, destroyed by my emotional unavailability. The student I dismissed, whose writing actually showed promise. The funeral of a colleague I'd skipped to finish a journal article. My mother's last days in hospice, when I'd been too busy preparing lectures to sit with her for more than an hour each evening. "Proceed," the voice resonated, shaking me to my core. The light began to recede, rising back toward the top of the wall. I dared to look up as it retreated, catching only the trailing edge of those impossible geometries. "Come on," Liam tugged at my arm. "We need to get inside." I pulled away from his grasp. "Stop. Tell me what's happening. What was that thing? How did it have so many faces? It said we can go through. Aren't we already in heaven? Haven't we already been judged?" Liam looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't noticed before, something that looked remarkably like fear as he glanced back up at the wall. "Those are seraphim," he said quietly. "If you're lucky, you won't see many of them. When I was alive, I thought ancient texts describing celestial beings were metaphorical or hallucinations. Turns out they were being literally accurate. Those mind-breaking forms are exactly what seraphim look like." He glanced over his shoulder again. "Now we really need to get inside before another one decides to check on us." "Why?" "Liam, what aren't you telling me?" Liam stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't understand yet. These aren't the gates of paradise you learned about in Sunday school. These are the walls of a prison. And the seraphim aren't servants of God, they're guards." "Guards," I echoed. "What are they guarding?" "Now let's get inside before another one comes down to check on us," Liam continued, ignoring my question as he began walking toward the emerald wall. I followed, my mind reeling. If the angels were guards, what were they guarding against? Or keeping in? The base of the massive crystalline spire loomed before us. Liam showed no signs of slowing as he approached what looked like solid gemstone at least 20 feet across. How are we supposed to get past? My question was cut short as a section of the apparently solid wall silently dissolved, creating an archway just large enough for us to pass through. Liam walked through as if this were the most natural thing in the world, as if walls routinely dematerialized at his approach. "How did that?" I began. "It's pointless to ask how anything works here," Liam interrupted. "The only answers you'll get are speculation from other souls or cryptic nonsense from our glowing supervisors." I wanted to press him further, but the sight that greeted me as we stepped through the archway drove every question from my mind. We entered a city of impossibly beautiful crystal and emerald. Towers of translucent green shot skyward, each one unique, some spiraling, others angular, all pulsing with an inner light that ebbed and flowed like breath. Prismatic reflections danced across every surface, casting rainbows in patterns that seemed almost musical in their organization. Between the towers stood smaller structures that appeared to be made of solid light given form, glowing with a soft blue radiance that was the only departure from the dominance of green. "Where is everyone?" I asked, noticing the eerie emptiness of the beautiful landscape. Liam pointed toward the base of one of the towers. "If you're unfortunate enough to end up in first heaven, the seraphim take you into one of those spires." I looked more closely and noticed almost invisible seams at the base of the nearest tower, suggesting an entrance that blended seamlessly with the structure. "But you're one of the lucky ones," Liam continued, "because you got me instead." He spread his arms wide in a theatrical gesture. "Welcome to the Emerald City, first level of heaven." "You didn't answer my question. Where is everyone?" "I was avoiding it," Liam admitted with a sigh. "Despite how this place looks, it's nearly empty. Anyone still around is either in second heaven or third heaven." "Still around," I repeated, confused. Liam looked toward one of the towers, falling silent for a long moment before saying simply, "You'll see." I was growing tired of his cryptic responses. I'd been dead for what felt like an eternity, and we'd barely traversed 10 feet into this emerald metropolis. There was no one else in sight, just these beautiful but empty structures stretching endlessly before us. I was about to demand clearer answers when I noticed something detach itself from one of the blue-glowing spherical buildings. A small orb of turquoise light separated from the structure, followed by another, and then a third. "They're taking their time," Liam muttered as the blue lights approached us. Unlike the overwhelming brightness of the seraphim, these orbs were small, no larger than tennis balls, and emitted a gentle glow that was actually pleasant to look at. As they came closer, I could see tiny wings made of what appeared to be luminous mist sprouting from their sides, beating gently as they moved. "What are they?" I asked as the trio of lights orbited around my head. "Cherubim." I stared at the tiny orbs, which had no discernible features apart from their misty wings. "Cherubim, the chubby babies with wings from Renaissance paintings." Liam laughed softly. "Yet another thing everyone gets wrong about this place." He pointed as one of the cherubim passed in front of my face. "Cherubim are the lowest order of angels. They mostly stay in those round buildings, follow people around, and cast judgment." "Judgment?" I eyed the closest turquoise orb with sudden suspicion. "These things are judging me right now." "Judgment with a capital J," Liam clarified. "Don't worry too much about it. It's mostly a formality at this point. If there was anything to worry about, the seraphim at the gate would have sent you straight to Aspire." My mind flashed back to the overwhelming presence that had peered into my soul, seeing every mistake and failure of my life. One of the small blue orbs stopped directly in front of my face. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the cherub bobbed up and down in the air. The other two ceased their orbit and joined the first, mirroring its bobbing motion before flying back toward the blue spherical building they'd come from. The first one, however, took up position just above my right shoulder and remained there. "That's a good sign," Liam said, watching the other two reunite with their home structure. "Liam," I began slowly, "you said before that the Seraphim are guards. What exactly are they guarding?" Liam turned his head to look at the wall behind us. Without answering, he started walking deeper into the city, heading in a direction that seemed random to me but evidently had purpose for him. After passing several of the glowing spherical buildings, I could finally see our apparent destination. Beyond one of the enormous crystal spires stood another wall, similar to the one surrounding the Emerald City, but smaller, perhaps only 300 feet tall compared to the seemingly infinite height of the outer wall. Unfortunately, this inner wall was also guarded by Seraphim. Their blinding light perched atop the pillars that interrupted the otherwise smooth surface. Remembering Liam's warning, I carefully avoided looking directly at them. The cherub that had been floating above my shoulder suddenly darted forward toward the nearest pillar and its blindingly bright guardian. The turquoise light of the cherub was absorbed momentarily into the white radiance of the Seraphim before re-emerging and returning to my side. Liam turned to me, his face tense. "Be careful what you say from now on. That little blue watcher isn't your friend. Think of it as a surveillance device. If you say or do something wrong, it will report directly to its Seraphim." What should I began. "Stop," Liam interrupted sharply, then flinched as he glanced up at the top of the wall. "You need to listen carefully. These are not your allies. They monitor everything you say and do, and you absolutely do not want to attract their attention." I looked up in time to see a turquoise light separating from the brilliant white glow of a Seraphim and returning to hover near my head. The Seraphim it had just left began to grow in size, its light stretching outward like a star-going supernova. Before I could speak or even fully process what was happening, a voice thundered from the pillar with enough force to shake mountains. The infinite light swelled brighter and brighter, and then everything changed. "You could have warned me that was going to happen," I grumbled, blinking and trying to orient myself in our new surroundings. The blinding light had vanished, and I found myself somewhere utterly different from the Emerald City. Most surprising of all was that we were surrounded by people, hundreds of them, all dressed in the same white garments, each accompanied by their own turquoise cherub. "Welcome to Second Heaven," Liam said with a gesture that encompassed our surroundings. We stood in what appeared to be an enormous underwater dome. The walls and ceiling were translucent, revealing an ocean beyond, not a blue ocean like Earth's, but one filled with bioluminescent creatures and coral formations that emitted their own radiance in shades of purple, blue, and green. The dome itself seemed to be constructed of coral and pearl, with intricate patterns that resembled mathematical equations etched into its surfaces. "Where are we?" I asked, surprised to find that despite the underwater setting, the air was perfectly breathable. "Second Heaven, specifically the harmonic realm," Liam replied. I looked around the vast chamber. Against the left wall of the enormous room stood a series of what appeared to be coral podiums, separate from the main structure. As I watched, A soft blue light flashed above one of the podiums, and where nothing had been before, a small glowing sphere appeared, not unlike the cherubim in size, but pulsing with a white radiance. One of the cherubs accompanying the silent crowd began bobbing excitedly until its human companion noticed. The man, who appeared to be in his 30s and in perfect health, walked over to the podium and picked up the glowing sphere. "And we're here because," I prompted. "Because I have to do my job," Liam answered. "My job is to guide you through second heaven, and you need to be guided through if you're going to reach third heaven." He pointed at the sphere the man was now holding. "That is the harmonic essence." I watched as another flash of light produced another identical glowing sphere on a different podium. Another bobbing cherub led another silent person to retrieve it. "Why isn't anyone talking?" I asked, noticing the eerie silence despite the crowd. Liam glanced meaningfully at a blonde woman who was walking toward an exit corridor with her glowing sphere. "Follow me," he said, ignoring my question. "Are we prisoners here?" I asked as we joined the procession moving toward the exit. Liam turned and stared pointedly at the cherub, hovering near my shoulder before answering. "None of us are prisoners here. We all do what we do because we understand our purpose." His meaning was clear. With our every word being monitored, we couldn't speak freely. He continued walking into a corridor, and I followed, joining a line of people carrying glowing spheres in front of us, while others returned empty-handed from the opposite direction. After a short walk, we entered an immense cavern that stretched beyond the limits of vision. Like the entrance chamber, this space appeared to be underwater, with the same bioluminescent ocean visible through its translucent ceiling. Rows upon rows of choral formations that resembled musical instruments, harps, chimes, and objects I couldn't identify, filled the space, nearly every one occupied by a person in white. Liam stopped and gestured toward the busy workers. "Here in the harmonic realm, you can see those judged worthy of entering second heaven creating the sounds that need to be made." I observed as a new arrival began to manipulate the glowing sphere above what appeared to be a choral harp. As they worked, the sphere began to emit a single, pure tone. "What exactly are they creating?" I asked. "Listen," Liam said, leading me down one of the aisles until we found another worker whose sphere was producing a more complex melody. "Here you can see another worthy soul as their creation becomes closer to what we need." I stopped, frustrated with the continued vagueness. Is everyone making music? And where does everyone sleep? And what is the point of all this? I immediately regretted my outburst as Liam turned to look at my cherub, which bobbed agitatedly in response to my questions. "There is no need for sleep here," he said carefully. "No one becomes hungry. There is no pain, no sickness, no earthly needs for our heavenly bodies." He paused, glancing at my watchful cherub before continuing. "Now that you've seen where the harmonies are created, follow me to the entrance to third heaven." The cherub seemed satisfied with his answer and stopped its agitated movements, returning to its position by my shoulder. Liam sighed with relief and turned to continue walking between the rows of musicians. Before we could proceed much further, however, one of the nearby workers stopped his musical composition. The man, a middle-aged academic type with wire-rimmed glasses, turned away from his station and looked directly at us. "Talk to anyone. How is that fair?" he demanded loudly. Liam looked at the man's cherub, which immediately began bobbing frantically. The professor continued his rant. We just work and work. Yes, we don't get tired, never get hungry, but what's the point? Is what we do really worth an eternity of labor without explanation? The man's cherub shot upward and disappeared from sight in an instant. For the first time since meeting him, I saw genuine terror on Liam's face. He reached out and pushed me back, away from the protesting man. Simultaneously, every person within 20 feet abandoned their workstations and backed away from the increasingly agitated professor. A blinding light suddenly appeared at the ceiling of the cavern. The voice of a seraphim boomed, disharmony detected. Before I could blink, the seraphim descended, enveloped the professor in light, and then vanished through the ceiling without leaving a mark, all in less than 5 seconds. The man was gone. Bring him to a spire in the Emerald City, Liam muttered under his breath. Now come with me to third heaven. He started walking away rapidly, and with no desire to share the professor's fate, I followed. We passed workers in various stages of their musical compositions. Simple melodies, complex harmonies, and intricate counterpoints filled the air around us. After what felt like miles of walking, I noticed musicians creating what appeared to be the final products of their labor. As one put down his tools, a completed musical sequence hung in the air before him, not just audible, but somehow visible as strands of light woven together in complex patterns. He picked up this harmonic structure and began following us, guided by his cherub. As we continued, another finished composition appeared, and another musician joined our procession. By the time I could see the corridor at the far end of the cavern, we were leading an orderly line of people carrying glowing harmonic structures. Guides, I asked Liam, who walked just ahead of me. He turned his head slightly, but continued moving forward. There are more than one of me. You guide all these people. There must be thousands in this place. Liam laughed softly. Of course. Do you think I could guide 6 billion souls by myself? You're not the only one who needs someone to explain what's happening and what your responsibilities are. I glanced at my cherub, which seemed content with our conversation. No one ever gets tired here, have they? I just realized I've been walking for hours, and I don't feel the slightest bit fatigued. You could walk forever, Liam confirmed. I could walk forever, I repeated, the implications sinking in. I looked at the people creating their harmonic patterns. They could work on those forever. The realization hit me like a physical blow. We were in an eternity of silent, endless labor, creating the same patterns over and over again. And for what? What happened to those who disappeared into the spires, never to be seen again? If we're lucky, Liam said quietly, interrupting my thoughts as we approached a short corridor. At the end stood a wooden door, the first non-crystalline, non-coral structure I'd seen in this realm, guarded by a single figure. Unlike the blinding seraphim or the diminutive cherubim, this being glowed with a warm golden light that radiated peace and joy. As we drew closer, I could see it had a human form, though its features seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. Guide, have you brought one worthy of third heaven? The golden being asked. Liam glanced quickly at me, then back at the being. Yes, Ariel. The radiant figure smiled at my cherub as it floated from my side to his. After studying it for a moment, he nodded and turned to me. You are worthy of entering third heaven and receiving the truth. Do you wish to know? Liam looked at me with intensity, mouthing, "Say yes," while glancing at the line of people behind us with their completed harmonies. If there was an alternative to an eternity of creating musical patterns, I had to take it. Yes, the golden being Ariel smiled and turned to Liam. I give you leave to third heaven, guide. Your charge is deserving of the revelations. I glanced from Ariel back to Liam. Revelations. Liam motioned me to step aside as the first person behind me approached Ariel with their glowing harmonic pattern. The archangel took the pattern from the person's hands and examined it carefully. Ariel inspects every harmony for flaws, Liam explained quietly. I watched as the golden light around Ariel dimmed slightly, while the harmony in his hands grew brighter. After a moment, the pattern returned to its normal glow. Ariel, I questioned. The archangel, the radiant being, smiled and held the harmonic pattern out to me. When a harmony is judged satisfactory, someone must bring it through the door. I took the pattern from him, surprised to find it had weight and substance despite appearing to be made of pure sound and light. It vibrated gently in my hands, producing a melody so complex and beautiful it brought tears to my eyes. We got lucky, Liam said, watching as Ariel began inspecting another harmony. We get to bring it in ourselves. I observed as Ariel held another pattern in both hands. Unlike the one I held, this pattern suddenly fragmented, its melody dissolving into discordant notes before fading entirely. Sometimes the harmony isn't strong enough for our purpose, Ariel explained. Now go. Liam turned and opened the wooden door, revealing a spiral staircase carved into what appeared to be living coral, leading upward. After you, he said, holding the door for me. I stepped through, still carrying the harmonic pattern, and Liam followed, closing the door behind us. As we began climbing the spiral staircase, I looked up, but could only see the steps winding endlessly upward. We've got a bit of a walk, Liam said, falling into step beside me. If you have questions, now would be a good time. I gestured toward the cherub still floating near my head. Isn't our little spy going to report us if we say anything wrong? Now that we've left second heaven, there isn't much we can say that will upset them. The information in second heaven is restricted for their own good. But here, he shrugged. A turquoise light floated down from above, and a moment later, a woman with elaborate braided hair appeared from around the curve of the staircase. Liam nodded at her as she passed, and she smiled in return. Someone you know? I asked. I know everyone who travels here, he replied. It's my burden to know everyone in the harmonic realm, every person traveling up and down these stairs. I've guided them all. How is that possible? There must have been tens of thousands of people down there. 144,000 to be exact, he corrected me. That's impossible. Even if you never slept and worked constantly, you died when? 2010, 2015. The math doesn't add up. Time is, Liam trailed off, searching for words. Different here. Not exactly different, but it's hard to explain. A moment can last forever. An eternity can pass in an eye blink. It's impossible to keep track without reference points. No night, no day, no meals, no sleep, I summarized. Exactly. We walked in silence for a while. Another soul passed us, nodding to Liam as they descended the stairs. What information is so dangerous that the people in second heaven can't know it? I finally asked. It's the harmonies and what they're used for, Liam replied. The souls there have been judged worthy to create the chains that contain something dangerous, something that threatens all of existence if it escapes. If they knew the truth, they might not make the chains. At least that's what I was told. I'm not entirely convinced, but I'm hardly in charge. Who is in charge then? This question had been burning in my mind since seeing the empty Emerald City. I'd seen angels of various types and souls engaged in eternal labor. But for what purpose? At whose command? No one as far as I can tell, Liam said, then glanced at the cherub floating beside me. They definitely aren't. They serve just like all of us. Of course, they have abilities we don't. The person who guided me compared them to advanced algorithms. Some, like Ariel, are more complex than others, but they're still following rules we'll never fully understand. An eternity of work with no answers, I mused. Sounds more like hell than heaven. Liam gave a short, bitter laugh. Hell is just the absence of God. Or so I'm told. I was about to press him further when I noticed a different quality to the light ahead. The staircase embedded in the coral finally ended, opening onto a surface bathed in a strange, diffuse glow. As we emerged from the stairwell, Liam gestured expansively at the landscape before us. This is third heaven. Welcome to the Creator's domain. We stood on what appeared to be a floating island suspended in an eternal twilight. The sky was neither day nor night, but a perpetual dusk painted in shades of amber and violet. Floating in the center of this realm was an enormous sphere of light, not blindingly bright like the seraphim, but gently radiant, pulsing with a rhythm that somehow felt both ancient and immediate. Surrounding the sphere was an intricate lattice of crystalline structures, bridges, platforms, and scaffolding that allowed movement around the massive orb of light. The entire structure seemed to be in motion, parts of it rearranging themselves in patterns too complex to follow. I couldn't finish the question. God, Liam completed it for me. Yes, the creator of all things. I looked down at the harmonic pattern in my hands, then at the cherub floating beside my head, and finally back at Liam. The angels aren't just guarding us, are they? Liam stared at the distant cherubim circling the sphere of light. No, he said after a long pause. Soon after God created existence, he tried to unmake it. I stared at the gently pulsing sphere that was apparently the creator of everything. But why would God want to destroy creation? That harmony you hold, Liam pointed to the pattern in my hands, is belief forged from the souls of everyone who won't make the harmonies that bind. I remembered what Liam had said when we began our journey. The spires in the Emerald City, he nodded grimly. When they make the harmonies, they become the harmonies. But it's God, I protested. If he created everything, how is this even possible? How does creation still exist? The belief that he's a creator who doesn't want to destroy us keeps him bound, Liam explained. But we are only his creation, and our beliefs can only restrain him for so long. The bonds break and need constant replacement. Your job, your revelation, is to replace those bonds as they break. In that moment, I understood the terrible truth of existence, that God had created reality, and then immediately regretted it, that all of the afterlife was an elaborate prison constructed by creation to contain its creator. Oh, the word escaped me as a sudden pain gripped my chest and spread throughout my body. I collapsed to my knees, the harmonic pattern slipping from my fingers. Liam knelt beside me, his face filled with concern. "You don't have much time," he said urgently. "My name is Liam Frost. I was an astrophysicist at the Antarctic Research Station. I died in 2016 during a solar storm." His voice grew fainter as darkness closed in around my vision. The last thing I saw was the glowing sphere in the distance, pulsing, waiting, restrained. Then nothing. I woke up in a hospital bed, every part of my body shrieking with pain. According to the doctor, Ramona Diaz, I had been dead for 6 minutes and 12 seconds. What surprised me more than my survival was seeing my ex-wife Rebecca asleep in the chair beside my bed. Apparently, I'd never removed her as my emergency contact, and despite all the pain I'd caused her during our marriage, she'd rushed to the hospital when she heard about the accident. I haven't fully recovered from the crash yet, and the memories of those 6 minutes remain vivid in my mind. I wrote them down primarily to make sense of them myself, convinced they were just hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation. Then I researched Liam Frost. The obituary was from 2016, a young astrophysicist who died during a solar storm that hit the Antarctic Research Station, causing catastrophic equipment failures. His last recorded words from the station's emergency transmission haunt me. "Hell is just the absence of God. If God wants to unmake all creation, and hell is simply the absence of him, then perhaps hell isn't what we should fear after all." You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.